interesting topic today, and it's interesting that boundaries is a hard topic, you know? So, I'm going to let it go. But did you know what tomorrow is?
Monday. Equinox.
It's the equinox.
Oh, that's right.
It's the equinox.
Spring.
Isn't it funny? It feels like we've been in winter forever, right? Forever. But I thought I'd put the definition of it, which is in the northern hemisphere, the spring equinox occurs when the sun crosses the equator line, heading north. Nearly equal hours of light and day happens. The name, my cat likes that, by the way. The name equinox is derivative from the Latin word meaning equal and night. So I was thinking, how do I bridge the equinox with boundaries? Think about it. In the equinox, there's a shift of the sun. In boundaries, there's a shift in our attitude. So that's how I'm going to bridge this today. But in the olden times, this is what the equinox meant. It meant the long dark of winter was finally over, and things would start growing again, and the world would be renewed. The spring equinox is the promise that the days won't just keep getting shorter until they disappear altogether. The equinox is the day when the promise is fulfilled. The light comes. The light. So if you think about the shift of the sun, a boundary is actually a shift in our mind. So yesterday you'll see my hands look a little rough today. I was making wire baskets, the 1/2-inch wire thick stuff, we just bought 4 different fruit trees, and some bushes that we are planting in the process of planting in our yard. And I was contemplating this talk because I'd already read what the material was, but there was something missing. There's always something missing. So I have to look for what that thing is that's missing. And what came to me was not only how we set boundaries in our life, but probably the most important boundary that we set is the one we use all the time, and we don't think about it. And it's our mind. Think about that. We don't always think about our mind. So I'm going to give you I'll talk about the other kind of boundaries later on, but I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes I get in, tell me if you ever do this, because I don't think I'm alone here, is we have this little winding going on, right? Something's going on in our mind and we can't let go of it. We just hold on to it and we sit there and we just take it. The thing is that we have to start with our mind first, that mind that's going crazy sometimes, so that because when we start with our mind, what happens is all the other boundaries kind of make more sense. If we don't work with our mind on the boundary issue, then it's just wishy-washy. It goes wherever it goes, right? Am I right on that? Okay, good. So anyway, someone told me, someone I walk with often told me this once when I was, you know how you talk with your friends and you just say whatever you want to say and then they'll say okay, and they just listen. They're really good friends. Anyway, as we're ending our walk, she says to me, "Don't let anyone live rent-free in your head." Because I was in one of those, I can't get over this. And it was like, oh, they're living rent-free in my head. In fact, you might want to write that one down because you might be handy later on. Anyway, as I said, I was doing my wire baskets, and a old hurt thought, and I was trying to think, how am I going to explain this? an old hurt thought came up while I'm doing this. I've got really beautiful music going, I'm doing my wires, I'm poking myself, I'm having a good time, but then I have this old hurt thought. And I caught myself. I thought, why do I have this going on? And I can't answer the answer why. But what I could do, and what I did do, is that I said to myself, don't let this rent-free thought stay in my mind. And it may sound very simple, but it's not. To tell your mind to stop. But you know what happened?
Stopped.
The thought stopped. And I went, oh, I got to talk about this tomorrow. I got to add this to my talk tomorrow. So basically, a shift happened. And I consciously brought the boundary to my mind, which then shifted my consciousness to new thought. So I thought, okay, that's all good and fine. That's something I discovered. But what would Ernest Holmes say? And you have no idea. I thought last night I lost my whole computer, but I didn't. But I have these files that are so large, it takes like 3 minutes to load. And I have several of those on my desktop, which I think I'm going to remove. But one of them is all about Ernest Holmes and what he said about the many different topics that he talked about. During ministerial school, an individual collected, things like the law, the mind, love. There's 100 topics. So I thought, well, let me just go into there and see what Ernest Holmes had to say. And there was many, many quotes about the mind. But I thought, well, how does that relate to this topic called boundaries? And here's what he said. So I'm telling you this because I want you to realize your mind is very powerful. It's extremely powerful. If we know how to use our mind, then it will benefit us in the long run. So I have 2 quotes. The first one it says, when man, and excuse Ernest, he only used man. I could say us, I could say, well, I'll just read it, but it's really for all of us. When man makes a demand upon himself or upon the universe which flows through the self, he is making a demand upon the original mind, the original energy. Thus, his or her demand causes original mind and energy to produce certain specific things for him or her. Thus is new creation produced by the same creative force or energy that produces all things. The mind that man or women use to conceive new ideas, the original mind of God. So something happened to me during that time that said, hey, this isn't the thing you need to be thinking about. There are not 2 minds but one. The universal and the individual are one essence. An apparent difference is in the degree only. Do we use it or do we not use it? Do we realize that Spirit's in our life or do we realize that Spirit's moving through us? His second quote, though, was very powerful. Remember that one very important trait of mind in its action as law is, what's the word? Obedience. The mind must obey. And I'm not making that up, okay? It must obey. It creates the question. It responds to your firm convictions and belief. Since I had heard this quote before, it rang back up. Don't let anyone or anything live rent-free in your head. I really suggest writing that one down. I'm going to tell you again, it's important to know that you have control over your mind. You have control. So the talk title is Boundaries Build Bridges. So I'm going to expand on a lot of that today, and hopefully I may end up skipping a lot of this because it feels like it's repetitive. But a couple weeks ago I said this: authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embrace who we are, by Brene Brown. But that sounds great, right? Sounds so easy to be that way. The truth is, I think that, I don't know, for me, I used to, and I still have a little bit of this, but I have a tough time communicating my boundaries. Tough time sometimes. I'll give you an example in a minute. And as we are growing up, maturing, I'll just say maturing over life, we learn to understand what our personal boundaries are. But until we really have, for me it was, I had to, destroy my life. And then I went, oh, I didn't have any boundaries. But now I know what those boundaries are. In fact, I'm going to give you a little example of one. I've lived in my house almost 17 years. And there's 3 of us that live in the house. I won't tell you who did this, but I'll just tell you that, things come up, right? Anything come up in your house? Anybody have any troubles? Okay, good. Anyway, the first 2 years of our house, one of the individuals would say, because we all share, right, in doing things. Oh, I'll do those dishes because I'm going up to clean and do the dishes. I'll do those dishes. Don't worry about it. I got it. So I would walk away and I'd come back 2, 3, 4 hours later. Nothing's happened. Nothing's happened. And eventually I would wash the dishes. You tell I love the story. Anyway, the punchline really isn't that the dishes didn't get washed. The punchline is it took me 2 years to figure it out. That the dishes were never going to get done. Now, that's kind of a boundary for me, right? So, why was that important? Well, I had to think about this because I had to think, okay, I don't want to hurt their feelings. We all live together. There's got to be a better way. And so I went into prayer and contemplation about how could I communicate this. So in one of my states, I heard the message say, because God speaks to me all the time, the message said, well, every time they say that, they're telling a lie to themselves. And because this individual is also very spiritual, I thought, oh, well, maybe I can communicate that. So one day when that happened, I stopped. I love that you're smiling about this. I stopped and I said, I have to tell you something, because I'm also the minister of the house, right? Spiritually, every time you say that you're going to do this and you don't do that, you are lying to yourself. And you're harming your own beingness. Because I had to come from, a real holistic point of view. Because when we lie to ourselves, we're hurting ourselves, right? And we can all relate to that in our own life. So, but what's so amazing is that the light bulb went on. The light bulb went on and they stopped doing that.
Wow.
Now it's starting to creep back up. So I'm going to have to figure out how to manage that one, right? But you get my point, is that sometimes we have to do that self-inquiry. We have to journal. We have to have conversations with ourselves. We have to talk to our friends. We have to realize, you know what? I don't want that XYZ in my mind. I want to do something different. Hey, buddy. So here's some other things that have boundaries that I think are really important. That we have to also focus on. I told you I'd talk about other boundaries, but our physical boundaries, people getting in our space, or our physical boundary, how are we taking care of ourselves? What's our mind and our heart and what are we putting in our mouth? That's a boundary. I'm not good at it. But I keep trying, okay? I keep trying. That chocolate, you got to get rid of that chocolate. Our mental thoughts. Think about it. What do we think about? How many people here, please raise your hand because I don't want to be alone. And those of you online, you can raise your hand or put a little hand up that have, I will call it a monkey mind. And it tends to take over sometimes. Look at that, all of us, yeah. Okay, those of you online, this is your time. Give me your hands. There's 1, 2. Come on, use that Zoom. 3. Good, I'm not alone. I want you to get this. It takes over. So we have to have some kind of boundary in there. I gave you the solution earlier. Our emotions. How many people have been told, oh, don't feel that. You're fine. Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Yes. I get so mad when they tell me not how to feel. How about material things, like things that belong to us? I saw a washcloth in one of the other bathrooms this morning, and I thought, that belongs to me. And I took it to my bathroom, and then I went, it's too white. It can't be mine. I took it back. You get the point? You know, it's like, got to think about these things. And then energetically, our time and our energy needs. How many of us go, hey, you know, I only have, I mean, this happens all the time. If you live with people, it happens all the time. They'll want you then when you're not ready. And sometimes you have to put a boundary around that. And then the last one is spiritual. And I'll tell you a little story about that one in a minute. We have to honor our own spirituality. But we also have to honor everybody else's spirituality. It doesn't matter what it is. I can remember in my dating days, I dated somebody who was kind of a Buddhist. And I was cool with that. Like, great, at least they have something. They have something, you know, they're not like nothing person. And so, but then, and we didn't date very long, but then they started making fun of my religion, my faith. And I went, that's a boundary for me. Totally a boundary. Because what we teach here isn't just that God is all there is and that you deserve to have everything that you want in your life, but we teach you principles of living and how to live in a world that works for everyone. It's not just about selfishness. It's about how do we co-create together? How do we make things happen? How do we have a good time together? How do we know that we can trust each other? When we understand those basic concepts, it's a whole different way of living, a totally different way of living. So my point is we can make boundaries all the way in our life. Either they're hard, they're soft, or we don't have a boundary. Because the other part of this being human is that we have choice. We have choice along the way. So Ernst Holmes said this about boundaries. He was so smart. While physical boundaries can act as walls, when we communicate our boundaries, instead of a wall, we are creating a clear path for others to connect with us. Boundaries build bridges. You need not ask what others have done or how they have done it. Be yourself and express life as you find it. Never imitate. Trust the self. Find the self in God and God in the self. It's so important to be authentic. You know, that's the other part of this formula is that authenticity makes us be more because we're not afraid. And having boundaries that have value to us make us more. Because the world really needs us right now. Do you realize that? It really needs us. Everywhere we walk, everything we see, everything we do needs us. Because we're holding a consciousness that's bigger than just coming to church on Sundays or Wednesdays. You know what I mean? So, Nancy Levine in her book, Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free, says this. And I think this is a great definition of boundaries. She defines boundaries as a limit that you set to define what you will or will not do, or what you will or will not accept to tolerate from others. That's a wonderful, and I want to put in there not just others, but ourselves. Ourselves. So if we're going to express ourselves authentically, it's up to us to be familiar with who we are and to be very clear about who we are. Because there's so many benefits to this. I'm going to kind of read some of them. Boundaries are the container in which our authentic self resides. I remember when I'd never had any boundaries. God, it was chaotic. It was craziness, you know. But I thought that's how the world worked. You know what I mean? I thought, well, that's just the norm. But it wasn't. Once I figured out what the boundaries were, my life changed 100%. When we have clarity about our boundaries, can you tell we're talking about boundaries today? We are empowering ourselves and we're empowering other people because they understand us. They get it. The other part is we make a difference in the world and in our own lives because we're empowered. We're not afraid of moving forward. We're shifting with the light. I put down that boundaries create mental and physical freedom. Feel that. You know, I think about that hurt feeling that I had, that earlier story. And the moment I said, you no longer can reside in here, you know what happened to the hurt that was in my heart? It went away. And I felt better. So we have that capacity to create that kind of freedom in our life. The other thing is we no longer become the doormat or give up our dreams. I used to be in business with an individual that whenever a complaint came in, they avoided it. So who do you think was the doormat?
You.
Me. I was always making excuses for them. And the day that I decided that I would no longer take those phone calls, you want to know how long it took for them to decide to get out of the business?
Quickly.
Very quickly, like within 6 months. And then I started ministerial school. It was like, perfect, God. The point I want you to get is if we understand, we know, we move in that direction, it's going to move for us. It's going to move in our direction. So I want to give you another example. I had written down a bunch of stuff here, but I'm going to, this is not that we're going to read the concordance here. But the story is, oh man, it must have been 15 years ago. We used to travel up to San Luis Obispo, San Francisco, and I would see customers along the way. And this one time, I was going to meet with a new buyer. Well, sometimes a new buyer is really cool, it's really fun, but I was at, let's see, what was it, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and it was a new buyer. And so, now, 15 years ago, I used to lug these carts of samples to show them, okay? They had to see the widget in order to decide if they wanted to buy it, right? Don't do that anymore. Anyway, I had lugged this huge bunch of stuff from the parking lot all the way to the back of the store. And we were like, I don't know, it was a weird place. We were like in a warehouse or something. And I'd been there before. I knew the prior buyer and so forth. Anyway, this guy, we're talking. And I'm showing my things. I'm doing my job. And I show him this, and he goes, no, I'm not interested. I'm like, oh, okay. No big deal. We're only 5 minutes in. What about this? Oh, no, I'm not interested. What about this? Oh, no, I'm not interested. What about this? No, I'm not interested. Now, at the time, I tell you this because it's a boundary for me now. At the time, I had this huge book of pictures and pricing and all this stuff. Anyway, it dawned on me as I was standing there, or sitting there, talking with him, he was not interested at all. You know what I did? And this is the first time and the only time I've ever done this. I went, you know what? We're done. You are not interested. Oh, no. Oh, no. I said, no, you are really not interested in anything I have to say here. I did the shock treatment. I've never done this again, but he was young, he was inexperienced, and he had no clue what to do with me. So I thought, well, you know what? I'm a big girl. I'm going to pick myself up. I'm going to lug my stuff out of here, and I'm going to go to the next place that they like me. But this became a boundary for me because I don't do business with anybody who doesn't like me, because I have expectations of them, and I want them to have expectations of me. Now that sounds simple, it sounds kind of like harsh in a way, but my purpose in here and what I do in the world is to serve. It's to serve God, serve my customer, help my customers make money, and if something goes wrong, tell them the truth. Don't hide it, don't make up stories, but be honest with them. But what I expect back, and I tell you this because it is not a one-way street. And sometimes you have to say it over and over and over. And I'm doing this right now with people. I'm saying, here's why you want to buy from the bookstore, so that they're in business, so that the money is recirculated in your institution, so that you have quality. You don't have somebody that's trying to rip you off. It's a partnership. But my purpose not only is to let me tell you what I want them to do for me. I expect them to consider me always as a source. I'm not the only vendor out there, but I should be number one. And I almost demand it. I also want them to know that I will tell them the truth about what's going on in the market, because the market is really a mess right now, with all the things that have been shut down, China not shipping. It's not good. And so when I tell them that, I said, you can take my word or you can go research it, but here's what our company has found out and we want you to know. So if you want something in 2 weeks, it ain't going to happen. I mean, you understand what I'm talking about. It's not easy. And the last thing is that I will be as competitive as I can. Sometimes I make more money than other times I don't. I had somebody give me a potential $24,000 order, and I made less. And I told him that, because I want you to get that business. It's a huge order. It was enough that they were like, oh, well, thank you. But I tell them the truth. I don't hide my secrets. It's totally transparent. That's a nice boundary to have with your customer. So if you're in business doing any of that, or your friends, being transparent is a blessing, because there's nothing to hide and there's no fear around it. Do you understand what I mean? Yep. Good. Okay. So the point is we create in the long run this roadmap of how we want to be in our lives, and we don't have to make anything up anymore. We don't have to play games with this. We just have to maybe contemplate, how are we going to do that? How are we going to communicate that information? What do we want our life to look like? I have another story. You'd like my stories?
Love it.
Okay. So I have another story about boundaries, and this happened to be when I was doing the dating game a long time ago. A very long time ago. And during that time, and it's kind of like when I began Science Mind, is that I would make a lot of mistakes. I lost everything in my life, and I didn't understand what happened to me. So I thought, okay, and Ernest Holmes, thank you God, says, go test this stuff. So I did. But I would go out and I would make the mistake 2 or 3 times and then finally go, I don't think I have to do that again. So I would then create a boundary, and I had to learn how to do that. Has anybody here had to learn how to do a boundary? Oh, good, I'm not alone. Great. But eventually I had to finally go, well, what is it that I want? What do I really want in this dating game? Because I really didn't like being single until I learned how to be single, and then I liked being single. It was fun. Anyway, the dating game, I finally started coming up with boundaries. Now, I'm going to give you 5, okay? By the time I was done with my boundaries, I had 2 pages, like 50 of them. And really what the boundaries were, who am I? What do I want? What am I willing to receive? And what am I willing to give? But here's just a few. So, first of all, they had to have a job. Anybody know that one?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. They didn't smoke because I had asthma, and that was really tough on me. They had to be authentic, really themselves. And if they were trying to make me think they were more than something, it's like, psh, gone. They needed to consider my needs. What were my needs? First time somebody asked me what my needs were, like, oh, you want to know what I want? Because we don't get asked that. What are your needs? And then the last one, which I spoke about, is that they had to be spiritual in some manner and respect my path. So all those are just 5 out of the 2 pages, which made about, 30 lines on a page. So over 60. And they were just one-liners. So it was very clear. And so you'll love this. What would happen is I would go out with somebody, and then I would read my list before I would go out with them. So bad. I'd read my list before I go out with them, and then I would come back. And if I had a good experience or a bad experience, I had a few bad experiences, I said, what's missing from my boundary list? And I would add it to the list. Now that sounds pretty crazy, but I've been married almost 27 years now, and only because I created my boundary list. And sometimes the boundaries get crossed, but at least we know where we stand. It's okay. So you too can have that too. Brene Brown says this. She says, when we fail to set a boundary and hold people accountable, we feel used and mistreated. This is why we sometimes attack who they are, which is far more hurtful than addressing the behavior or the choice. So, we really have to be clear about that. I have so much more to say, and she's given me just 5 more minutes. So I'm going to kind of summarize some of this. We have to remember people can't read our minds. Okay? As much as I want you all to know what I'm thinking, and I want to know what you're thinking, I can't read your mind. So you got to tell me, all right? I know that communication is scary, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And if you have a hard time doing this, I invite you to journal. Just journal. I have a method that I recommend to a lot of people is take 1 page of the journal. If you had 2 pages, take 1 page of the journal and just write all the stuff that is bad. All the things, the feelings you have, all the yuck you have, here's what I need to tell them things. I do this a lot. And then on the other page, write a prayer. Write a prayer knowing that you will communicate properly, knowing that this is possible. In other words, you're affirming now all those things that you want to get rid of and now affirming what you want. I guarantee you if you do this and you do it religiously, things will shift very quickly. So don't be afraid to do that. The other thing is decide to be brave and ask for what you need. Maybe you'll get what you want. By just knowing that. I love it when somebody says they can't do something and I say, oh yeah, that's possible. 'Cause it is. Anything and everything is possible. I love this one. It's like, no is a complete sentence. No means no. Knowing, it's really important when we know when our yeses are yeses and our nos are our nos, and that saying no is our right. We have a right to say no, even if we don't want to do it. In my backyard, we were deciding where the trees would go, right? I'm like, well, I want that one over there and that one over there. And this one over here is not in where I wanted it. Because, and of course, this individual would say, but that's not a good place for it. I would say, it should go over here. There's plenty of room. It's like not like I have a half acre of land. Anyway, so I had somebody, eventually I said, okay, fine, we'll put it there, right? And my no became a yes. My no became a yes. Anyway, it ends up the person who dug the hole dug it where I wanted it. And I did not mean that to happen, but it did. Thank you, God. The thing is, when we say no to something, we do what I call an imprint. You've heard imprinting, right? Like animals imprint on us. We imprint on our mind, reinforcing our values and our boundaries. Okay? And the other thing is, we start to remember those things, and even the comment about, don't mess with my head, my thoughts here, we start to remember that, and we get a little bit stronger in giving our thoughts and communicating that. I have one more that I want to just state, and then I'm going to move into it. What happens when we say yes and we really mean no? What do you think happens?
Confusion.
We create confusion. And it's an internal conflict. So sometimes not even answering is okay. Just know you have that one out. Ernest Holmes said this. He said, "You rob no person when you discover your own good." See, we think we're taking something away. "You limit no person when you express a greater degree of livingness. You hinder no person evolution when you consciously enter into the kingdom of your good and possess it today." And the same is true of the opposite. And when somebody says no to you, it's not changing or hurting anything. Just know there's an equal communication going on here. The bottom line is it creates freedom, a lot of freedom. So I have a couple more things that I want to end with. And this is the part I think that when we come to a faith or a religion, happens to some of us, at least it did for me, is that we will lose people as we move on because we don't fit with them anymore and they don't fit with us anymore. Now, that doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It's just kind of awkward and it's sad. But as time goes by, if they, that old thing about the bird flying back, if it's meant to be in your life, they will be. They will always be in your life, and they will be very special. And so it's important to know that even though things shift, it's kind of like when you stop drinking, if any of you have done that. I can remember in my really younger years, I used to be at the bar paying for everybody's drink. It's real funny when I said, you know what, I'm not buying the drinks anymore. They all went somewhere else. It's the same kind of thing. So the thing is when we have boundaries, we will attract people that are like-minded, more like-minded than us. So we're bringing forward that which we want. We will create freedom in our life, and we get to choose whether we want to do something or not. The other thing is our life becomes, I must say, happier and easier. There's not a lot of struggle. I notice that I don't like struggle anymore. I have a very low pain tolerance for struggle. And that doesn't mean that my boundaries are wrong. It's just that I don't want to go there anymore. I have so many years more to live, and why not be with all my customers I absolutely love. It's like all of you I absolutely love, because I love being with your mind and your hearts, because I know they're true. And it just feels good to be there. So the bottom line is I'm much happier most of the time, and I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for all I have, even though at one point I had nothing. But I realized I had everything. And in the process of coming back to who I am today, I've told other ministers it's the greatest life I've ever had. And I'm very grateful for that. So I have an affirmation I'd like us to say together. And I'm hoping, I've taken a subject which seems kind of like, ooh, and made it easier for you to understand how valuable it is. So let's just say this together a couple times. Sharing my boundaries builds bridges, authentically connect with others. Let's do it one more time. Sharing my boundaries builds bridges to authentically connect with others. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. I'm going to bring Leslie back up, and I'm going to pray this idea, this concept of knowing that the divine is moving through everything. So closing our eyes, I am just claiming here and now that Spirit is moving through each of our lives in a very great way. The boundaries that we think are big are really about attracting the oneness of God into our lives. Attracting those things that move us, that grow us, that reside, and claiming that the good of God is here right now and that we can have it. And so I bless these words, I bless these concepts, these ideas, these knowing that these are principles of living, principles of life, that Spirit is moving through all of us to know that we deserve a greater life, to create that life that we want, and that there are no limits to the possibilities of our freedom and our happiness and the love of ourself and the love that we see in other people. So with that, I simply give great thanks for this day, knowing that boundaries are now a good word. It's a good word. It's a good word that moves and grows our lives. And so with that, I just say thank you, God, and so it is.
Believing that divine intelligence is ever available, open your consciousness to its guidance. Keep your mind steadfast to the thought that you are governed by divine intelligence. Feel that you are impelled to make right decisions, that you are compelled to act upon these decisions intelligently. Turn resolutely from every sense of lack, want, and limitation, and declare that the perfect law of good is operating in, for, and through you. Say to yourself, through complete reliance on Spirit, I calmly face all false conditions, seeing through them to that invisible reality which molds and recreates my affairs after a divine pattern. With a penetrating spiritual vision, I dissipate all obstructions, dissolve all wrong conditions. Standing still, I watch the sure salvation of the law of good. I know that my word transmutes and transmits every energy into constructive action, producing health, harmony, happiness, and success. I know there is something at the center of my being which is absolutely certain of itself. It has complete assurance, and it gives me complete assurance that all is well. I expect everything I do to prosper. I enthusiastically expect success. I let good flow into my experience. I am seeing good in every direction I look. I am looking forward to more good. I think with clarity, move with ease, and accomplish without strain.